In 2022, Russia passed a law putting a blanket ban on LGBTQ plus propaganda, and a year later they labeled the LGBT movement extremist. It's safe to say that Russia does not want people watching LGBT plus media. Yet, Heated Rivalry has still managed to become somewhat of a sensation in the country. If banning queer media worked, then the story wouldn't exist, and it certainly wouldn't be popular in countries like Russia. So what's happening? Hey Spuds, it's Jamie, welcome back to another video of Festival Channel. I don't know, but welcome either way, and today we're talking about Heated Rivalry and how LGBT plus stories and media and hope can transcend even the most homophobic of situations. So firstly, what is Heated Rivalry about? Sports. We're talking about sports on the channel today. How unusual. Sports and gay. That makes more sense. In short, if you love gay romance and ice hockey, probably even if you just like gay romance and don't mind ice hockey, you will very likely very much enjoy Heated Rivalry. I'm going to give a short-ish plot summary just so you kind of know the general gist of what's going on. It's not really going to contain spoilers, I don't think. It's not going to be a play-by-play of the series at all, because this video is about the impact that Heated Rivalry has had, specifically within Russia, rather than actually what it's about as a TV show. So actually, Heated Rivalry started off as a book written by Rachel Reed that's part of her Game Changers book series, and it was turned into a TV series in 2025. I believe it was actually a kind of like low budget Canadian only series, and then it got bought by a bigger broadcasting streaming service and then has now become a big global success. So it's pretty cool. The story follows two professional ice hockey players, Shane Hollander, who is Canadian, and Ilya Rozanov, who is Russian, and they play for different teams, hence rivalry. Despite their rivalry, over years of encounters with one another, they develop a romantic relationship. Their career competitiveness being at odds with their personal lives and feelings leads to big life and professional choices needing to be made, including how or whether to make their relationship public whilst dealing with the pressure of being famous and sporty, being a famous sports person. It's got the whole enemies to lovers thing going on, so if you enjoy that kind of narrative, I'm sure you will like this. You know, they've got this whole like media documented fierce rivalry and competitiveness with each other, but then secretly behind closed doors they are in a romantic relationship and get along. There's also internalized homophobia and sportsmanship and the pressures that come with that whole life of not being straight within a very stereotypically masculine and toxic masculinity sphere or sport. There are a lot of conflicts created when you're gay within the landscape of traditionally and typically homophobic professional sports. The first season has 6 episodes and is a mix of slow burn and romance and emotional drama. There are possibly several reasons as to why this has reached the level of success that it has. One being that it's just a well done adaptation of a book, and another that it includes a lot of emotional depth and well-rounded characters that people feel like they can see themselves in and relate to and find recognition with. Also, I did not know this, sports romance is a genre and it has been rapidly growing recently, and combining sports with queer romance has really been hitting for a lot of people, partly because of exploring the pressures to be masculine and, I guess, straight within these contexts and particularly within the public eye. And then, of course, it is a TV show coming from an already popular series of books. There's a built-in fan base there. It's kind of like Heartstopper-esque, where the show is well done and it is a good show, but it is propelled by this fandom that is already there for it and waiting for it to be made into a TV show. Sorry, that is my slipper. I'm not farting. There's also been a cultural impact of the show beyond it just being a TV show, including impacting the real life world of professional ice hockey. Jesse Cortum, I hope I'm saying the name right, an ice hockey player from the States, was inspired to come out after watching the TV show. He spoke about how his passions for hockey had always felt at odds with his sexuality, and after hiding his sexuality for so long, the show helped encourage him to share his identity publicly and his experience of being closeted within the world of professional sport. So this impact has also broken down barriers and it's properly become a global success. It is all I've heard being spoken about recently, and by global success that does also mean that it has become successful in countries where it's actually banned to watch it, including Russia. This makes sense as one of the protagonists is Russian, and the story is reflective of real-life identity conflicts and representation struggles. Broadly speaking, it isn't shocking that a television show that has become a phenomenon in Canada and the US would also find enthusiastic audiences elsewhere in the world, but there may be a specific reason why Russian audiences may be tuning in. Ilyashina writes that Rozanov's fraught relationship with his homeland mirrors the lived reality reality of many viewers. When Ilya says he won't be able to return to his country if he comes out, that's pure truth, says Dima. CBC News is only identifying him by his first name, given Russia's severe anti-LGBTQ+ laws. This was somebody who was speaking to the news who lives in Russia about their opinions on the TV show. Before, while it was just condemned, now it's literally a reason for hatred. They can beat you, they can detain you, they can arrest you. Russia has been rolling back LGBTQ+ rights in the country in a big way for over a decade now. In 2013, a law called For the Purpose of Protecting Children from Information Advocating for a Denial of Traditional Family Values was passed, and this effectively banned any public representation of LGBTQ+ people or relationships, but specifically in front of children. This led to a decade of increasing homophobia within the country, arrests of anyone deemed to be breaking the homophobic law, and the repressing of LGBTQ+ media and representation. Then, 9 years later, Putin signed into law an amendment to the 2013 law that now included stopping gay propaganda for people of all ages, not just children. There'll be hefty fines for individuals and organizations who broke this law, and it was reported that Russia allowed its media regulator to block websites containing LGBTQ+ information. Then by the end of 2023, Russia's Supreme Court made all LGBTQ+ activism illegal, meaning that anybody found guilty of being involved with LGBTQ+ organizations could face up to 12 years in prison. It's such a dystopian language to say found guilty of being involved with LGBT+ organizations. That could land you in prison. That's something to be found guilty of. No. Even things like displaying pride flags can lead to a prison sentence. The Supreme Court also labeled what it calls the International LGBT Public Movement as an extremist organization. There's no such thing as an official global LGBT organization or movement like that. It was a very vague blanket thing to say, and the hearing was also held by closed doors with nobody from the defendant side able to be present. Russia started off 13 years ago by saying, we just want to protect the children.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
Still very wrong, but this is a common way for governments and groups and organizations and homophobic people generally to get a foot in the door of being full-blown mask-off homophobic. Because in just 10 years, this led to an outright ban for anybody, including adults, to be visibly LGBT+, to consume LGBT+ media, to fly pride flags, to be part of LGBT+ organizations, to be involved in LGBT+ activism. The list goes on. It's a very slippery slope to go from we're protecting the children, which shielding them, not that they need it, from LGBT+ people is in no way protection. It doesn't stop kids who were going to grow up to be gay growing up being gay. They will still be gay. They'll just be very, very repressed and not understand their own identity. But it went from we're just protecting the children to now an outright blanket ban on anything LGBT+ related for anybody of any age. This is a similar narrative that we hear a lot, and right now it's predominantly towards the trans community in other countries. It's the same dog whistles that are the start of more widespread discrimination and erasure for those marginalized communities. It's we just want to protect women's rights. It's things like just think of the children. It's only about sport. Just don't shove it in my face, etc. But it's never about just those things. It's never about protecting women. It's never about protecting children. It's never just about sport. That's just the start. It's always about hatred and bigotry towards that group and slowly building the blocks to have outright discrimination. Russia's current blanket ban on LGBT+ people and media and activism is by its nature pretty vague and designed to distract, control, and spread fear. It's led to a widespread repression of any LGBTQ+ media, with platforms removing content and publishers censoring anything that is LGBT+ related. This is not about protecting anybody, by the way. This is just homophobia. This is just control. This is just shutting down the visibility and constricting the lives of anybody who is not cisgender and straight. And a big part of this homophobic ban from Russia is to do with the government there not wanting the international influence of LGBT+ people and groups. They're treating being LGBT+ as something that is not natural to Russia, something that has come from an outside Western influence, and something that can be stopped if the outside influence is stopped. But queer people have always existed in Russia, okay? There's even evidence of tolerance within medieval Russia. And in the early 20th century, Russia was not an outright terrible place to be LGBT+ in terms of the general landscape for LGBT+ people back in the early 20th century. This includes in the 1920s, where the Soviet Union was very briefly at the forefront of queer rights and trans research. However, in 1933, under Joseph Stalin, homosexuality was was recriminalized. And even up until the start of the 1990s, it still had some of the most repressive anti-gay laws in the world. However, in 1993, same-sex relationships were decriminalized, and progress was actually gradually being made in terms of societal opinions. LGBT plus organizations grew within big cities like Moscow, and gay clubs and drag culture was something that were present. Also in 2000, the single All the Things She Said by Tattoo was released. I feel like if you don't know that song, where have you been? It's a queer song about a girl being in love with another girl, and it was released by a Russian pop duo, and it was at the top of the Russian music charts for 4 months. This was in 2000. It was in the early 2010s that gay rights within Russia and the progress that had been made since the early 1990s started to go backwards again. And the general viewpoint that had taken prevalence in the 1930s and led to the criminalization of being gay became persistent again, in the sense that homosexuality and anything LGBT plus related was labeled as Western degeneracy and ideology and needed to be stopped. They really do seem to be under the belief that if they stop outside influences, nobody will be LGBT plus in the country anymore. Like if they prevent people from talking about it openly and learning about it and consuming media about it, that magically nobody will be gay anymore. Clearly somebody has not picked up a science book or understood even the most basic level of how things work, because that is not how it works and that is not what will happen. Suppression does not equal absence. Just because people can't be open about being LGBT plus does not mean they don't exist anymore. Many have fled the country and others live in secrecy. But LGBT plus Russians in Russia and allies do exist, despite the homophobic laws. And this in part makes it clear why things like Heated Rivalry gain traction and popularity. It offers representation and recognition and visibility. So despite the anti-LGBT plus laws in Russia, and despite the fact that Heated Rivalry isn't available on any Russian streaming services, plenty of Russians have been able to watch the show, become fans, and share their love for it. And a Russian version of the internet movie database, Kinopoisk, I hope I said that right, it had votes from more than 30,000 fans rating Heated Rivalry, and it was given a rating of 8.6 out of 10, so clearly these fans are enjoying it. But many fans from Russia have been using VPNs to hide their IP addresses in order to be able to watch the show safely. But the use of a VPN makes it difficult to accurately predict where the show is being watched from, as it masks your IP address and feeds it through servers in different countries. This means that the popularity of the show in Russia is likely much higher than what's actually being reported, because a majority of people are probably hiding where they are watching the show from. And fans have also been sharing the show privately with their own social networks and circle of community. And the show has appealed to both Russians still living in Russia and others who have fled the country. 24-year-old Dima, who works as an engineer in Moscow, was intrigued by the steamy show centered on the romantic relationship between two professional hockey players, one Canadian, one Russian. As he started watching it, he was hooked. He was immediately impressed by how US actor Connor Story was able to nail the accent while portraying Ilya Rozanov, an arrogant and charismatic Russian center, and he felt a deep personal connection to Rozanov's struggle with being open about his sexuality. There are memes, posts, and reels on social media from Russians who enthusiastically admit to binge watching the spicy content. But the series has also prompted deeper, albeit much more private, conversations in a country where same-sex unions aren't recognized and the government goes to great lengths to extol what it considers traditional values. People are watching it in part because it is forbidden, a guilty pleasure that the government would likely view as dangerous propaganda, Demas said in a voice memo sent to CBC News. The popularity of Heated Rivalry in a country that bans media like this could be seen as an example of the Streisand effect. This is where attempts to censor information backfire due to curiosity and an increase in its perceived value. But bans also very rarely eliminate the banned activity or the demand for it. Instead, it just pushes these activities and the demand underground into less regulated and less visible spaces. People also have anger-driven engagement, wanting to share banned content as far and as wide as possible as a form of protest. Media has always been an incredibly powerful source of representation. It allows people to see themselves in other people and in other people's experiences and feel less alone. And even if people aren't LGBT plus themselves, this kind of media can break down barriers and open minds. So when that LGBT plus media itself, like Heated Rivalry, explores themes of having to keep love and identity a secret, with there being an overarching fear of exposure, and when personal truth is at odds with what somebody has to show publicly, this can really resonate with people living in countries that are incredibly oppressive to LGBT plus communities. That moment of recognition, of seeing yourself in somebody that you are watching, particularly if you are in a difficult and oppressive situation, can be incredibly powerful and uplifting. Because at the center of Heated Rivalry is a love that has to be hidden. Not because it isn't real, but because making it public could be dangerous. For people in homophobic countries like Russia, this isn't a story, this is reality. For a lot of people watching, shows like Heated Rivalry are about recognition, not just representation. These shows offer people validation for their feelings, sometimes before they're even ready to admit or understand their own identity. So countries like Russia can ban LGBT plus media and everything else LGBT plus related as propaganda, as they would call it, but it doesn't stop people from being LGBT plus. And it doesn't stop people from finding that recognition and finding that representation and not feeling as alone. It doesn't stop things from existing. The success of Heated Rivalry in Russia, as well as the positive reception it's had in the country, is evidence that censorship fails. And it's evidence that demand for LGBT plus content and enjoyment of that content still very much exists. Queer joy and queer resilience is still there, even in the toughest of situations. People are clearly not just finding it thinking,
Oh, what a lovely new show about ice hockey. I like ice hockey and sports. Let me watch this ice hockey show. Oh, it's gay? Ew.
the high ratings suggest that that is not happening. I'm sure a few people have done that, but there's indication that even if people are accidentally stumbling upon it as a queer representation, they are still enjoying it. Every time stories like this bypass LGBT plus censorships, it proves that LGBT plus stories are not the problem. LGBT plus people are not the problem and are here to stay. LGBT plus stories and visibility are not propaganda, and you can't convince the gay out of anyone just by trying to bury the conversation. Anyway, that was just a little exploration of Heated Rivalry as this global phenomenon and the impact it can have around the world and the importance of this type of representation. Not just Heated Rivalry specifically, but just generally this kind of representation and the resilience of LGBT plus people and LGBT plus stories. Let me know a piece of LGBT plus media that you found when you really needed it, something that helped you out, something that helped you figure out your identity, something that made you feel less alone, something that came at the perfect time. For me, it was a documentary about a young trans guy. I came across it by chance when I was 16, and that is what gave me the language to understand that I was trans and be able to start my journey and live as my true self. So it's something I'm very grateful for. Yeah, leave a comment down below of what you think of Heated Rivalry and anything else that you're enjoying at the minute or enjoyed in the past. Yeah, and think about giving a thumbs up and subscribing if you want to, but no pressure. As always, thank you so much for watching. You'll see some names going up the screen of my lovely Patreons. Thank you so much for supporting me over there. And a big shout out to my top tier Patreons: Kia, Tasha, Night Soul, Sugar Joe, Elden K, Nesta, The Third Hatman, Max Makes Mods, Della Nervin, River Champamon, Chloe, Ina Balash, TNS Mum, Sally Drew, Randy, Albar, Marv Mallow, Rachel Raptor, Jesse Entwistle, Gosco, Sienna Lamb. That was an early breath I had to take. Damn. Slayer, Sarah Hobbs, The Paisley Prince, Riley Ray, Bill Dad the Shoei, AAA_Mars, Claire Henley, and Marin. Thank you so much for all your support. Really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you so much for watching the video. I'll see you next time. Much love. Bye.